What's your best wedding horror story? Story 1. I was at my aunt's wedding. As she was walking down the aisle, a phone rang. It was her soon-to-be mother-in-law's. It rang for a while she fumbled through her purse. She finally got it out and answered it and talked for a while my aunt was walking down the aisle. Story 2. Bride had 14 attendants, each of whom got their own song to walk down the aisle to. The church was overpacked by 100 people. The air broke in July in said church. Nope, nary. A window to be had in 90-degree Iowa summer. Ceremony was almost 3 hours long because 1, so many people wanted to recite poems or sing songs or whatever, and 2, the groom's brother gave the wedding talk and turned it into a remember when we did this blow-by-blow of their entire childhood. We finally get to the blessedly cool reception hall. Dinner was supposed to start at 6 p.m. At 8:30 p.m., the bride fainted from lack of food. This was after another 2 hours of cousins and aunts and uncles giving speech, poem, and song one after another. Why they didn't do this after the food was severed, I will never know. And finally, around midnight, their fight between the best man and one of the groomsmen. Both of them were blackout drunk and wanted one of the 14 bridesmaids' numbers. They decided to fight it out in the middle of the dance floor. Classy S. Story 3. Many years ago, my parents went to an adults-only wedding. It seems at these types of weddings there is always that one couple that brings their kids anyway. Well, during the reception, one of the guests had a heart attack and died right on the dance floor. My parents said it was pretty traumatic watching people scramble to try and perform CPR and hearing the thumping of fists hitting his chest and seeing his bowels release all over the place. Needless to say, the kids that were present were horrified, and the mother kept trying to turn everyone's concern to her kids instead of the dead gentleman on the floor and the couple whose wedding reception just got ruined. Story 4. More funny than horror. I was one of 9 groomsmen in my friend's wedding. When we stood on the stage during the ceremony, the last groomsman in the line, the bride's brother, was a good 30 feet from where the bride and groom were standing. Anyways, before we walked out, bride's brother says to me, "Man, I got us so badly." Me, thinking he was joking, just told him to let her rip. About 10 minutes into the 45-minute-long ceremony, he did indeed let her rip, but silently, so. Due to the air conditioning in the church being on, it took a bit for the stench hit me. It was like a low-hanging fog. Over the course of the next couple minutes, I observed this putrefic cloud overtake each groomsman one by one until hitting first the groom's nostrils, then the priest, and finally the bride, who started gagging. Story 5. I'm actually a wedding DJ as well. I once attended a wedding in which the groom failed to attend. It was a total disaster. The bride looked like she could have been just 18, absolutely adorably cute, and she just sat out in the hallway crying with her parents while her friends and family were moved from the ceremony hall to the reception area for dinner and drinks. Weirdly enough, though, the groom showed up later in the evening after the minister had already gone home. We had their formal dances, but on that day, they didn't actually get married. Story 6. Went to a wedding once where the caterer messed up the food so bad that it was basically inedible. They ended up making up for it by ordering a mass amount of chicken from KFC. The reception was literally just KFC meals. Everyone was shocked and horrified. Me? I loved it, 'cause come one, who doesn't love some good old Colonel chicken? Story 7. My brother's 3rd wedding. Everyone shows up except the bride's father, who shows up almost an hour late in a t-shirt and jeans. Proceeds to loudly exclaim what he would do to the bridesmaids. Insults the groomsmen for dressing up. Gets shit-faced and wrecks on the way out. Or my father's wedding, where the bride's mother brought whiskey to the wedding. Gets shit-faced before the ceremony and loudly exclaims how my father is not good enough for my mother. Gets thrown out and slashes the tires on the limo. Story 8. I was at a friend's wedding reception and we're having a good time dancing. A different friend's kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old, was hiding under a table while his parents were getting shit-faced and ignoring him. The kid then starts running and laughing through the dance floor, and I see him wipe something that looks like chocolate on the bride's dress. She's mortified, and everybody stops dancing. It was. He had into his hand and wiped it on people. Years later, my wedding was child-free. Story 9. For the record, this happened 2 days ago at my cousin's wedding. The bride and groom had requested there be no young children at the wedding, which in my opinion is a pretty understandable request. Well, a member of one of the families created a huge stink about it, saying they had no one to watch their 1-year-old. My cousin and his fiancée kept insisting that they didn't want children, at least at the ceremony. Well, they brought the baby anyway. I bet you can guess what happens next. 2 minutes into the respectful silence of a really nice ceremony, the baby starts screaming murder. Luckily, they were at least respectful enough to leave when the baby started crying. Well, I guess baby calmed down, brought them back in, and before you know, round 2 murder. You could feel the entire crowd cringe. I felt terrible for my cousin and his new wife because they are really genuine and understanding people. It was incredibly rude and disrespectful. TLDR, bride and groom requests no babies. Someone brings baby. Baby screams murder during ceremony. Twice. Story 10. My mother not telling any of us she had both her legs amputated and showing up at my wedding and reception, both being held at non-HP friendly locations, having to be carried upstairs in a wheelchair. Story 11. When my parents got married, they combined their names and each changed their name to a hyphenated version. So their names were Mom Dad's name, Mom's name, and Dad's name, Mom's name. When I was born, they named me Daughter Dad's name, Mom's name. Last week, I spent 20 minutes getting harassed by the clerk who was filing my marriage license. First, she wanted to know my maiden name. My maiden name is Dad's name, Mom's name. I came into this world with a double last name. She didn't like that. Then she wanted to know my dad's real name. My dad legally changed his name. With the power of the law behind him, he tacked my mom's name onto his. That is what it says on my birth certificate. That is what it says on his driver's license. She didn't like that. Finally, she wanted to know my mother's maiden name. My mother, out of all of us, actually has a maiden name, so she got that. But now, on the form, the mother had a single name and the father had a double name. She didn't like that. She stressed, repeatedly, that if any of this information was incorrect, I wouldn't be married. She stressed that they were actually going to check. She stressed so hard, her stress had stress. I'm taking my husband's name. I've had enough of this bullshit. Story 12. To start off, Iceland has a very small gene pool. So small, in fact, there was made an anti-app to make sure that you're not banging you cousin. Or if you are, at least you know it. I once went to the wedding of a couple where the groom was Icelandic. His mother did not approve of the wedding because she had the fear that the bride was related to them. So, on the wedding day, she got up and actually objected. It took one of the groom's men running down to the bride's mother's house to fetch the family Bible, which traditionally is used to record the family tree in my culture. The groom's man came charging back in about 30 minutes later and just about threw it at the mother and screamed, "No, this woman is not a member of the family. Maybe please be allowed to be one now?" Story 13. Oh, and my husband's co-worker wanted to bring his 2 young daughters to our wedding. 4 and 6 years old, maybe. He said they would be good. They've been to weddings before. So we say yes. They show up in the flower girl dresses that their parents got for their canceled wedding and proceed to act like flower girls. They photobomb a bunch of our pictures, the ones of just the married couple, before we had to ask them to get out of the shots. Everyone asked if they were the flower girls. No, they just really wanted to be. Story 14. A horror story with a happy ending. Friends had a small wedding, with the reception in a private area of a restaurant, with about 30 people. After the meal, our server came through the doors with the 3-tier wedding cake in her arms. When she got front and center, she slipped and hit the floor like a rock, face first into the cake. The initial laughter stopped quickly when it seemed she might be hurt, because she wasn't moving. She got up with help, obviously sore, but crying as hard as I've ever seen, hysterically apologizing over and over. Fast forward a couple hours, and thankfully she was physically okay. But even better, she was serving New Yorkers with money who felt terrible for her, and were now drunk. I don't know what the hosting couple tipped her, but I'm certain she picked up another $5,000 from the guests on the side. I threw her $100 and I'm cheap. She was crying again when we left, but for an entirely different reason. Story 15. On the day of our wedding, it was discovered that the venue had booked 2 outdoor weddings at the same time. Ours, and another in a gazebo not very far from ours. Somehow, the father of the bride in the other wedding found out that our processions were going to be at the same time. He also found out that our procession included a bagpiper, as myself and groomsmen all in kilts, while his daughter's wedding procession was to have a harpist. He approached me and very nicely asked if we would consider delaying our procession for about 20 minutes so our bagpipers would not drown out their harpist. After conferring with my soon-to-be wife, we agreed that a 20-minute delay was no big deal for us. Unfortunately, the father of the bride should have taken some other factors into consideration and instead delayed his daughter's wedding. Because their procession went off without a hitch, and everyone in their wedding heard their beautiful harpist. But the vows were pretty much inaudible once our bagpipers started at the requested 20 minutes later. I found this out later that day because apparently one of my cousins attending my wedding had a friend that was attending the other wedding. Seriously, it was, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to cue bagpipes," until our procession was over. I hope the other wedding party was able to get some sort of compensation from the venue for their oversight, since they had been informed of the musicians at each wedding, and didn't bother informing either party. On top of that, our DJ had burned a CD with our chosen husband-wife dance song on it, and didn't bother to check it before the reception. The song would not play because the CD somehow did not burn right, and we had to pick another song to dance to on the fly. We got a nice discount from the DJ company for that one. Story 16. We had a real DJ at our wedding, spinning records and playing weird electronic dance music. My brother got lit on the free booze and apparently took a bunch of pills. He then proceeded to give the DJ tons of pills. Our DJ then went on a 45-minute set of original music and was the definition of shit-faced. When we tried to leave and say goodbye to everyone on the microphone, he told us that he was almost done, and we could have the microphone in like 10-15 minutes when he finished up. My brother puked in front of everyone after we left. Story 17. I used to work for a DJ company, and one time one of the DJs was performing at his best friend's wedding. Which is weird. You should never ask friends to work a wedding. So he needed to borrow a bunch of equipment and asked me to come along to handle setup and run the lights. This DJ, who was at the time one of the more respected senior DJs at this company, was the worst example of a wedding DJ I ever saw. 1. Played music all night way too loud. Even after guests complained, he would pretend to turn it down, then turn it back up. 2. Drank all night long and ended up sloppy before dinner even ended. 3. Bridal party intros were unintelligible. 4. Played nothing but Sinatra during dinner. I mean, come on. 5. Played the wrong first dance song for about 10 seconds until his friend, the groom, and bride were glaring at him and he decided to say, "Oops," over the mic, then started to play the correct song. Not from the beginning. 5. During dinner, he proposed to his girlfriend right in the middle of the dance floor. 6. And of course it was so loud during dancing that most of the guests left after complaining in vain to him to turn it down. I reported this horrendous turn of events to the owner of the DJ company, who shrugged it off because he didn't really care what sort of service he provided, just as long as he got paid by clients. I quit soon after. Story. 18 wife's co-worker got married. She was super nervous, so her bridesmaids decided to give her some liquid courage in the form of tequila shots. She wasn't feeling it fast enough for her liking, because it takes a while, Fs. So they actually overdid it some. She wasn't an experienced drinker either, so lower tolerance for more booze. She was nervous the first 2 minutes of the ceremony, and by the end was feeling pretty good about life. By the reception, she was pretty knackered, several sheets to the wind and losing grip on the rest. She was wearing a strapless dress that had fit when she got it fitted properly, but apparently had shed a little weight from being so jittery over the course of the 2 weeks leading up to the wedding. So the dress was just a tiny bit roomy. These details will come into play soon. So she's going around thanking people in that drunken way for coming when she sees me sitting with my wife. She apparently thought it was time to tell me what an awesome guy I was by hugging me. Drunkenly. To her chest. I guess she was going in for a more appropriate hug but didn't make it. She lifted her arms for the hug, and at that point her dress went for a bit of a trip. So basically I got a face full of the bride's naughty pillows. She hung on for a bit, gushing about me. I could breathe, but damned if she wasn't actually clammy, bordering on really sweaty. July wedding, go figure. When her groom and maid of honor extricated me after about 15 seconds, the groom was a true bro. He gave me a "this was really awkward" look instead of being mad at anyone. She looked down and made that classic overemphasized oops reaction and hauled herself, not very well, back into her dress. My wife was far too shocked to be mad at me, thank God. All of us at the table agreed to not bring the incident up with the bride. TLDR. Bride forced me to motorboat her sweaty pillows in front of my wife. Story. 19. Back at the hotel after my wedding, a cousin of mine cheated on her husband with one of my groomsmen. while under the impression me and said groomsmen were related. As in, when I told her the next morning that he was my buddy from college, she was disappointed. Like visibly deflated, he was just a friend of mine. It was interesting because at my wedding shower, she was stirring up controversy by sitting on my dad's lap and whispering stuff in his ear. She is my first cousin. My dad is her uncle. She didn't ruin any actual events, I suppose, but she certainly got people talking afterwards. We don't invite her to stuff anymore. Story 20. Cousin April's 1992 wedding was ours. In no particular order. Groom has with the stripper at his bachelor party the night before. Was super proud they were getting married at a wedding chapel John Wayne Bobbitt was working at. Bride and groom snort coke in their limo on the way to their reception. Bride and groom continue to snort coke in the bathrooms at their reception. All relatives get blind drunk, including my husband's grandparents. We were the only sober ones. Cousin Lori wants to dance to I Want to Fuck You Like an Animal with my husband, who happens to be one of her first cousins. One of the relatives made off with all the table decorations. All kids under 10 years old smeared wedding cake and food all over each other. Groom bride returned to her mother's house with the rest of the family. All they cared about was opening envelopes for dollars. They gave a less about anything else. Amazingly, marriage lasted 10 years. I guess Cousin April got tired of her husband not coming home at night because he was too tired to drive home. Oh yeah, and she's a teacher to elementary school children. Story 21. I used to do wedding video, but really didn't see many horrors. Only two come to mind. 1. Leslie, that's the name of the bride. She was a bridezilla before the term existed. She was horrible to absolutely every single person she encountered at the wedding. Well, almost everyone, as I somehow managed to escape her wrath. BTW, me and my biz partner in the video business received dozens of referrals from her. 2. The wedding without a photographer, almost. Their photographer did not show up and could not be reached. They started calling photographers in the yellow pages and managed to get someone. Not only someone, but a very good one. And the only reason they got him was because he had retired the year before and his ad was mistakenly still in the yellow pages. Funnier yet? He photographed my wedding a few years earlier. Small world and all that. Edit. Forgot to add, the original photographer showed up for the reception, which was held at one of the nicest country clubs in the area, wearing shorts, a t-shirt and flip-flops, and couldn't understand why everyone was so pissed off. Story 22. Second story for this thread. I had a relative collapse and start having trouble breathing shortly after dancing started. I saw a group of people helping him to a chair, and he seemed like he was really ready to pass out. Paramedics were called and they quickly got there, within minutes it seemed, and helped him onto a stretcher. The guy never lost consciousness, but since I had turned the music off, it really put a very awkward and gloomy shadow on the wedding. The bride was sort of panicked, and I told her that we'd just pick up where we left off and that we'd pass along info as we received it, and that I would need her and the bridal party's help to get the floor going again. It was definitely a strange feeling, but within a few minutes things did get back to normal and the guy ended up being released that very night. He had gone golfing earlier in the day and just gave out. Story 23. My father-in-law's girlfriend threw a fit because the bride, my sister-in-law, didn't want her to sit in the mother of the bride's seat. She wanted the spot to be left empty in memory of her mom who passed away 9 years prior. Then she brought her daughter and daughter's boyfriend to the reception and took up spots at the bride's family table. I had the pleasure of sitting next to them. The boyfriend vaped during the reception at the table. The daughter ordered 6 or 7 on the beaches. They danced very inappropriately. He kept smacking her, and she would jump in the air and wrap her legs around him while making out. We were all disgusting. The mother of the groom told them that this was a family-friendly wedding and not a nightclub. Father-in-law's girlfriend was very mad that somebody told her guests to stop acting like dogs in heat, so she caused a scene. My father-in-law sided with his girlfriend and left his own daughter's wedding reception without saying goodbye. Story 24. My ex had 2 friends who were lesbians and marrying each other. They weren't Christians but kept Christian vows in to appease family. The uncle of one of them had particular views about gay marriage and made that loudly known during the ceremony, including the "do you herp, take derp to be your wife" part. There may have been other family members who thought similar thoughts, but they were more diplomatic, less drunk, or both. However, the uncle's sons definitely didn't share their father's opinions and bodily dragged their father out of the service. I hear it started a family feud, pro and anti-gay against each other. Sad stuff. Story 25. Drunkenly broke my heel as best man at a wedding. Had to be carried around by the groom's huge brother like Hodor carrying around Bran during the post-wedding brunch. Story 26. The minister got totally blackout wasted on the groom's apple pie shine, ended up with the groom's mother on his lap at least 3 times, and gave some unintelligible slurred advice to the groom's niece and daughter. I was that minister. Story 27. Third story. For this thread. My brother and I were never close anyway. I am a wedding DJ and he booked his wedding date on a day I was already booked for. I live in another state, so I wasn't able to attend. I wanted to, but there really wasn't any way. The day before his wedding, he calls me. I literally had forgotten about his wedding, so focused on my own wedding I had to perform at, that when the phone rang and I saw his name, I immediately thought, holy, I forgot to congratulate him. My brother told me our father had gotten into a car wreck on his way to my brother's wedding. This was October 11th. His wedding was the next day. He was a little frantic, obviously, because he wasn't sure how to handle this. And I told him, you have to go out there and pretend that didn't happen. You cannot mention it to anyone. Not in any speeches or anything, otherwise your bride's fantasy is going to go from congratulations to condolences. They managed to have good wedding, it seemed. I think he was able to get through because the reality hadn't set in yet. I was super proud of him for that. Since then, we've become a lot closer. Edit. I was typing this as I was rushing out the door and didn't solidify. My father was killed in the accident. Story 28. A little late to this one, but here it goes. A friend of mine who I had lost contact with was going to get married a few years back. I knew the girl from high school, but we had lost contact as well. It was a catch-up once a year type of thing, but back in the day we were really tight. I knew she had some health issues, but it was never anything really serious. Fast forward to the week they were going to get married. I heard that she had a heart attack and was in the hospital. They ended up having to postpone the wedding because she was still in the hospital. Through some mutual friends, I knew she wasn't doing so great, so I decided to drop by the hospital they were staying at because I knew a few mutual friends that had dropped by. I make my way over to the waiting room and I see some people I knew, but my friend, the groom, was nowhere to be found. Literally 10 minutes after I got there, her family and my buddy walked out of some double doors crying. She had passed away on their actual wedding day. My friend and I made eye contact, and he came over, gave me a hug, and just started letting loose. It was by far the saddest thing I have ever seen. I went to the funeral and we hung out a bunch over the next few months. We eventually faded away again, but still catch up about once a year. I'll never forget the complete shock that came over me when I realized that she had actually passed away. I had no idea it was at that point. I thought I was going to just hang out with them and catch up for a bit at the hospital. Story 29. My sister brought a strange girl with her that I didn't know to my wedding. She didn't ask if this was okay, just seemed to be pleased that a girl was hotter than me and showing me up. The girl showed up at the reception, then proceeded to dance and gyrate with my new husband. I asked him to stop, but he said no, he doesn't want to dance with me and was grabbing her bum. I cried alone I the loo for 30 minutes. Then our cab came to take us to our hotel, and I was looking longingly at my dad in hope he would notice how sad I am. I couldn't speak. I was humiliated. I then got completely drunk on whiskey in the hotel bar at midnight, in my huge dress, telling all women never to get married. I couldn't undo my dress or get my hair undone. I woke up to piles of hair on the floor I'd ripped out, a giant puff of ripped white fabric, my wedding ring in the bath and my jewelry broken. 9 missed calls and a missed flight to our honeymoon. Story 30. My sister-in-law asked to sing at our wedding. We said no. It was super casual and not religious at all. She sang anyways, after the best man and maid of honor speeches. Story 31. Maya Mill came with her 2 sons, my husband's half-brothers, to our wedding. She took a plane, and so she didn't have a car. On the wedding day, she drove me, bride, completely nuts with her normal, overly dramatic rhetoric. When it was time for bride and groom, rather buzzed, to get a ride to our hotel for the night, Emil started freaking out about having to drive our car to her hotel. We were getting a ride from friends, and she was going to take our car and we would meet back up at noon the next day to see her and the boys off. The ceremony and reception took place at my parents' house about a half hour from the hotels. She started freaking out about driving 20 miles in the rain, and not one person in my family offered to drive her. My husband ended up having to ride with her, and he knew I was furious with her, so he sent me along with my friends to be dropped off at the hotel. He forgot to give me the credit card, and his mother drove 15 map and then delayed him at her hotel for over an hour. I sat in my wedding dress, alone, on my wedding night, in our hotel lobby for almost 2 hours while my MIL freaked out. Story 32. A good friend of mine had someone open fire during his brother's wedding. The shooter was aiming for the groom. Thankfully, he missed and no one was hurt. The police showed up after a few people tackled the shooter and held him down. The wedding party carried on as if nothing happened, LOL. Story 33. I work at a museum that people rent out for weddings on nights and weekends. I was working a wedding a while back where the bride disappeared as soon as the dances were over. I was walking around the other end of the building when I almost walked past the bride sobbing all over her mother cry, "I can't be married, I don't love him, I've made a mistake," over and over as her mom was trying to console her. I noped away from that really fast, talking to the bartender later on. She had been drinking heavily since the bar opened. Story 34. My friend was about to get married, and when the priest said, "Speak now or forever hold your peace," some girl, whom I think was one of the groom's old girlfriends, emerged from out of the curtains. I should mention she wasn't even invited, and I can see why now. She started singing a fucking song about how he shouldn't say yes and instead run away with her. Well, he fucking agreed, and in song as well. They had no shame. They planned out their escape too. They just sang in front of the entire party that they would meet each other at the back door and run away together. The poor bride just sat there crying. I felt absolutely terrible for her. Story 35. Probably going to get buried, but my father and his best friend were going to get married to a pair of sisters in a combined ceremony. The sisters and my father just happened to first cousins, which isn't really germane to the story other than this meant everyone from the family was going to be there. Wedding weekend comes up and family throws a party for 3 days. One of my father's cousins was on leave from the military, had brought home some souvenir disarmed weapons for show. Didn't say, but this takes place in 1960s Colombia. You can see where this is going. Young cousin takes a safed-off grenade and, while surrounded by a group of younger cousins, tries to mount it to a board or something with a hammer and nail. Yup, it was a live frag grenade. I don't know what the body count was, but the wedding turned into a mass funeral for several young children. The wedding still went on, but in a private ceremony out of respect. Story 36. This one not too awful, but my wedding. We were in the limo going to my future wife's house in the morning, part of Vietnamese wedding tradition. Anyway, it broke down. We're waiting for a replacement and it's taking forever. The driver has the divider window up and isn't updating us. Now, I'm patient and realize it's not his fault, but me. I'm a seether. Slow to anger, but when it starts boiling, there is going to be an explosion. My sister notices I'm beginning to boil and takes over. Finally, the replacement shows up and it's a motherfucking party bus. A fucking driving beer advertisement. Not even cleaned up inside from the last party. Anyway, when we got to the house, I told my sister, "Make that fucking thing disappear by the time I come out." She got it done. I think the company actually ended up renting one from another limo company. Wasn't too bad in the scheme of things, but at the time I was irritated. Story 37. Went to a wedding when I was like 8 and it was at a super nice place. There was a giant waiting room for the 30 bathroom stalls. It was a Victorian-style room. I was just chilling in there with my cousin, playing with some toys I had brought, when all of a sudden barge in all these women with a man that's clobbering this woman. I would later come to find out that was his wife. All because he told her not to go to the wedding. He thought it was her wedding and she was trying to marry someone else. Presumably to get out of this abusive relationship she was in. It was so sad. The man got arrested and sentenced to 39 years, for some other too. The woman had to go to the hospital. She got 18 stitches and lost some teeth. She's widowed now, cause some guys beat the out of him for being a tough guy and thinking it's okay to beat his wife. Story 38. My brother's fiancée showed up late to her own wedding. She showed up an hour late to her own wedding shower, so that wasn't a giant surprise, but still really rude. The odd thing was, her limo showed up in the parking lot. It was an outside event, and sat there for a bit, then peeled out and drove away. She came back and everything went fine. We learned less than a year later that she had been sleeping with someone else during that time, and they got a divorce when the baby was born and wasn't my brother's. Story 39. Buddy and me, fresh out of video production school, did videography for a wedding. He lost half the footage the night after, and he's socially awkward, so I got to deal with the pissed off bride and her mother. Story 40. I went to a dry wedding. However, it wasn't dry for the bridal party because they brought their own alcohol and got fucked up in the limo, and the beginning of the reception. They also kicked out anyone else who drank because the bride didn't want any drunk people to ruin her wedding. Story 41. My whole first wedding was a horror story. Was too young and didn't realize until it was time to put the dress on that I did not want to get married to this person, but saving face won out, and I did anyway. Completely emotionless. Barely even remember the whole dang thing because my maids had to fetch several large vodkas to get me to put the dress on. That was just the beginning. Friend's psycho boyfriend made a huge scene, and I ended up passed out in the wedding dress on the bathroom floor. No happy feels the next day, and no honeymoon. What was I thinking? Oh, to be an idiotic 22-year-old again. Not. That was 11 years ago. Obviously, we divorced in short order. Getting married in 7 weeks to a guy who I am 100% certain I can't wait to marry. We dated for 8 years to be sure. And I am only concerned that someone will cause drama at my wedding. A guest has an SO+1 who is itching for a proposal, and I am worried that if it doesn't come, she might not be in the best state of mind. Poor emotional state. Plus copious amounts of alcohol. Plus wedding usually, yikatar disaster, in my experience. Why is this a concern for me? Well, last year we all vacated together during same month as wedding, during which she was expecting this same proposal she's expecting now, prematurely. And she didn't handle it well when it didn't happen. Alternate fear? She does get her proposal prior to my wedding and dominates my wedding welcome party, wedding and wedding weekend talking everyone's ear off about her wedding, which is extremely likely given her personality. Story 42. Not really a horror story, more annoying than anything. A relative of mine got married and the couple made it known quite publicly that they didn't have enough money for a honeymoon, so they asked everyone to make a donation in order to be able to eat. I have no idea if this is a common thing to do, but I and several other family members were unbelievably pissed off that we actually had to pay at all. Never mind that fact that we were family. Story 43. Both my mother and her mother faked injuries to try to take the spotlight at my wedding. Luckily, my brother was there to usher both of them out and to medical attention. Story 44. A fight breaks out at my stepfather's daughter's wedding. The only two people who get arrested are the father of the bride and his brother the cop, stepdad and brother. They were likely drunk and mouthy, so the local cops decided to teach them a lesson and knock the out of them. The brother police's department comes to pick up one of their own to find he's been tuned up, guns are repulled, and there is a standoff in the jail. This goes all the way to court. The brother cop won't testify against the cops who kicked his, but the judge let them go because who arrests the father of the bride. Story 45. Told this story before, but last wedding I went to, the groom was doing oxys with his friend in the back room right before the ceremony. When it came time for him to walk down the aisle, he stumbled out with a glazed look in his eyes. He could barely walk down the aisle, and he passed out before they could get through their vows. People were screaming, crying. The bride and her mom left sobbing. They actually got married for real like 2 weeks later and now have a 2-year-old.